If you've been following my YouTube channel at all, I'm sure you'll know that I'm very much a film music enthusiast, and one of the things I've always done kind of unconsciously throughout the years is just read the name of every single composer attached to every single movie that I'm either watching or reading about or that's coming out. And I've noticed one trend in particular that seems to stand out. Almost all of them are men. Now, why is this the case? The typical feminist explanation for why this is the case is that the institutions have been keeping women out of the job. But is that really true? Hi, for those who don't know me, I'm John, and today's video will be an attempt to explain why there haven't been more female composers of film music.
The Oscar goes to Rachel Portman for Emma.
In 1996, the British composer Rachel Portman made history by becoming the first woman to win the Academy Award for Best Original Score. She has said of herself, "It never occurred to me I was one of the only women composers in film when I started out. There is still a huge imbalance in the industry when there are many, many greatly talented women composers of film music around now. I hope it becomes more and more the norm to see women credited as composers in film and TV in the future." In spite of her success, Portman remains only one of 3 women who have ever won this prestigious award, sharing the honor with Hildur Guðnadóttir with her score for The Joker, and Anne Dudley, who wrote the score for The Full Monty. To this day, it's not very common to see film scores written by women, though it does happen on occasion. But why is this the case? And what's the classic feminist answer to this question? In order to answer this particular question, we're going to go back to a famous essay written by the feminist art historian Linda Nochlin. In 1971, Linda Nochlin published an essay called "Why Have There Been No Great Women Artists?" The essay is about the visual arts, but it applies equally well to our subject. I want to take a very brief look at the essay and glean a couple of points from it for our consideration. And just to give credit where credit is due, I learned about this essay from a woman named Julia James Davis on YouTube, who has her own channel. It's called The War on Beauty. I would strongly recommend that you watch that video, and I'll link it in the description below. I'll also link Linda Nochlin's essay in the description and would advise you to read that as well, because it's whatever you think of Linda Nochlin and her philosophy, it's well worth reading the essay. First, let's take a look at Nochlin's basic thesis. The thrust of her essay is that there have been no great women artists because there is no such thing as innate artistic talent. If people have ever become great artists, it's simply because of certain social conditions that favor their rise to prominence. These social conditions, however, were always designed to exalt men and to exclude women. To quote Nochlin, "The question of women's equality in art, as in any other realm, devolves not upon the relative benevolence or ill will of individual men, nor the self-confidence or abjectness of individual women, but rather on the very nature of our institutional structures themselves and the view of reality which they impose on the human beings who are part of them." But in addition to this, I would say that there's an assumption hanging over this whole essay like a cloud. Unless women can do all the things that men do, unless what they do has some kind of material, tangible, quantifiable benefits, then women are worthless in society. Once again, to quote Nochlin, "Why have there been no great women artists?" The question tolls reproachfully in the background of most discussions of the so-called woman problem. But like so many other so-called questions involved in the feminist controversy, it falsifies the nature of the issue at the same time that it insidiously supplies its own answer. There have been no great women artists because women are incapable of greatness. So now that we've pulled these things from Nochlin's essay, let's start answering her point by point, using her essay in the context of the world of film scoring. First, if Nochlin's right when she says that there are no great women artists because the institutions were set up in such a way that women just couldn't get the opportunities and the education to get there, then how does she explain the fact that today, when women have more opportunities than ever to compete with men, even in a field like this, there's still a dearth of female film composers in the industry? Even today, there's less than a handful of female film composers who could even hold a candle to someone like Jerry Goldsmith or James Horner or John Williams. So I'm sorry, but Linda Nochlin's thesis just doesn't hold up much under the weight of history. Now, while we're at it, I think we should also address her point about talent not being innate, but instead just being the product of social conditioning. Nochlin writes, "Underlying the question about woman as artist, then, we find the myth of the great artist, subject of 100 monographs, unique, godlike, bearing within his person since birth a mysterious essence, rather like the golden nugget in Mrs. Grass's chicken soup, called genius or talent, which, like murder, must always out, no matter how unlikely or unpromising the circumstances. Now, here and elsewhere in her essay, Linda Nochlin makes the valid point that sometimes historians and biographers go way over the top in their praise for the composer and they practically deify the guy. In the process of deifying the artist, they forget the simple fact that a lot of his so-called talent is really the result of what he was taught. He's just learning stuff from his teachers and learning to copy it well. Every artist is to some degree the product of his time. There's no way around that. Now, like I said, this objection from Linda Nochlin is very valid. However, in making it, she goes to the opposite extreme and concludes that all artistic talent and success is really just a product of social conditioning. To be honest, I think all of us know that this is pure foolishness. We all know that certain ones among us are much more inclined to artistic pursuits than others, and they pick them up more easily. Sure, there's a lot of copying involved, especially at the beginning. There always is. But at a certain point, you always tend to make the craft your own, and you start adding your own personal touch that isn't from what you were taught and doesn't come from your environment. For example, Beethoven was known to copy extensively the music of those before him, like Mozart and Haydn. But even while he was doing it, he certainly put his own personal touch into it. And in his later music, you really start to see his own personal style come out more and more. Now, I think we should also address Linda Nochlin's assumption that a woman should have all the same accomplishments as a man. And just so you know, this section is going to get a little heavily philosophical, but bear with me. The feminist demand is that men and women should share the same accomplishments and should be equal in everything. But should they really? The trouble I see with this assumption is that ultimately it's materialistic and it fails to take into account the true nature and potential of women. And I think we can start to see this problem come out when we trace Linda Nochlin's reasoning back a few steps and ask why she would think this way. Why should a woman have all the same accomplishments as a man? Well, because a man's accomplishments tend to be more external and material and quantifiable. But why would material, external, quantifiable accomplishments be the only way to measure a person's worth unless there is no spiritual realm? When I see reasoning like this, I can only conclude that Linda Nochlin, like all other feminists, is a materialist, and her materialism prevents her from seeing any worth being given to women in society unless they prove themselves by doing everything a man does. So ironically, feminists are not giving women an upgrade by assuming that women should do all the same things as men. Instead, they're hurting both women and men by assuming that both have to be judged solely by their material contributions to society, their quantifiable contributions. And while it's true that men's contributions to society tend to be of a more material, external, quantifiable nature, a woman's main contributions to society, on the other hand, tend to have a more spiritual, internal nature rather than external, material, and quantifiable like a man's. If feminists understood this point and abandoned their sterile materialism, they wouldn't be so self-conscious about proving their worth by trying to shove more women into fields dominated by men. This subject that we're getting into right now is so deep that I think it deserves its own video, so I'm going to make another video that's all about the real role of the traditional role of women in music and what they've done the most of, which is to be a muse and an inspiration and the object of veneration for the artist. Unfortunately, all Linda Nochlin talks about in this regard is the female nude, which, by the way, is a valid example of objectification of women. However, this is just a corruption of something good. It's just a corruption of the male desire to elevate women and to see them as the bearers of beauty. And that's something I want to talk about in my next video. Now that we've addressed some of the main points of this essay, it's time to answer the question we started this video with. Why aren't there more women writing film scores today? I would offer two main reasons. First, I'm just going to be blunt. Film scoring can often be a grueling and intellectually demanding job. Just ask yourself this question. How many women out there want to be the next Jerry Goldsmith? Sure, the guy had fame and success and money, but just think about the price he had to pay to get it. How many women would really want to have the kind of schedule this guy did and work as hard as he did to get the position he ended up with? At the height of his popularity, Goldsmith was putting out about one film score every 4 weeks, back to back. Now, I personally don't know how people do that, even men do that, and still keep the creative juices flowing. That is a lot of hard work and it's very impressive. Now, obviously, some women have chosen to get into this sort of job. Women like Rachel Portman. So at least some women have taken on this kind of challenging life. But I'm willing to bet that if more women don't do it, it's probably just because they don't want to. And frankly, why do they need to do it? Just to prove that they can do it, everything that men do? Anyway, this is my theory. Take it how you will. The second reason I would offer that more women aren't film composers is simply that I think, and this is going to be rather controversial, I think that a man's nature tends to lend itself better to this sort of work than a woman's nature does. Men and women are very different in their capabilities, and while women are great multitaskers, men are very good at focusing on a singular goal and organizing everything around it. Now, this kind of quality is very important in the arts. We need to be able to step back and take a look at the big picture and see how everything fits together and make sure that everything does fit together. Am I saying that women can't write good film scores, or they can't become great painters, or they can't become great writers, or whatever other kind of artists they want to be? No. What I am saying is that I think that when women do want to become exceptional at these things, they're probably going to have to put in a lot more effort than a man would to achieve the same results many times. And besides, the role of the artist isn't the one that women have filled the best historically. The role that they've filled the best is that of the muse and the inspiration for the artist. And I think that's more exalted than it might sound at first, and I really want to make another video about this to explain what I mean. So without further ado, I will just end the video here, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time